Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. I'm here today to talk about the smaller pets in our household. I don't talk about them very often, but I do want to acknowledge them because I grew up with them. We had a guinea pig first. I was so young that I actually don't remember the guinea pig. We had its cage though after, and when we got hamsters for the first time, we used the cage, and then we had a goldfish that I think I was young, so I don't quite remember, but I'm pretty sure he lived to be something like 8. It was crazy. He was probably about that big. And then I had a lizard for a little while. For those who remember way back then, she was about this long. She was like light brown and green. I named her Tiki because of her coloring. And after that, then I had a bird, blue lovebird about this big, got from my friend, and kept her until I had to go to school and they wouldn't allow pets, so I had to give her away. And then obviously when I got home, I got Kaya, and the rest is history. But I wanted to acknowledge them because they're very good teaching opportunities for kids. A lot of them, it teaches them things like responsibility or taking care of somebody other than yourself, which is really important. And if your kids really want a kitten or a puppy, it's probably a good idea to start with one of the smaller ones, just because a lot of kids like the idea, but then when they find out they have to, clean out the fish tank every week or clean out their cage every week, then they're less thrilled about the idea. So it's a good idea to start because it's kind of a little test, or have your kids lizard sit or bird sit and see how it goes. I know we dog sat once and I loved it. The dog she slept in my room, but she wanted to go out in the middle of the night a couple times. And I think I was about 12 at the time. I'm going, what's happening? It's the middle of the night, what's going on? So it's definitely worth it because dogs and cats are a huge responsibility. And obviously horses are even bigger because they require a big time commitment. But just something to consider because it's a good stepping stone before you immediately go puppy. And then if you get one and decide that it's not right for your house, then you'll end up getting rid of him or her. And it's definitely not worth it to go that far. But I wanted to talk a little bit about their health and well-being, just to give you an idea about what typically diseases or conditions they get. Not to scare you off or anything, but just to make sure that you're educated about it. So guinea pigs and hamsters typically have a lot of skin problems. Now, my thought is that because they live in, they pee and they poop in their pens, and then they live in it, and they're so low to the ground and the flakes are really dry, that they get quite a lot of skin and respiratory conditions because there's not enough moisture there. Pneumonia is actually really common in guinea pigs. Urinary stones are also common, but I think part of that is because their urinary tract is so small and they're breathing in a lot of toxins, and some of them pee and poop in their food and water and then end up drinking it before anybody notices. So there is a lot of toxin buildup in their environment if it's not cleaned regularly. Diarrhea is really common as well because they have really, really sensitive stomachs. So any change to their food or environment can upset them entirely. Tumors and abscesses go under skin conditions. Sorry, this is not straight. Tumors and abscesses mostly because if they're rubbing on something like the wire of their cage or really sharp shaving and they cut themselves, unless they're taken out immediately and somebody notices and cleans it, it's really common for them to get lumps and bumps and things like that. And the tumors, again, for skin conditions and being in a toxic environment. Scurvy. For those who don't know what scurvy is, it's a vitamin C deficiency. A lot of mammals can produce it in their intestinal system, but guinea pigs can't. So guinea pigs, and I'm not sure if hamsters can, but I know that guinea pigs can't. But it is quite common, so it does have to be supplemented somewhere. Obviously, you can't give them a human vitamin C, but giving them foods rich in vitamin C sometimes help, or finding a specific supplement meant for rodents is a good way to go. Parasites and skin problems. Again, a lot of things burrow and nest in their cages, and if they, for example, it's really warm and cozy somewhere, the parasites may like that spot just as much, so it's good to move around. If they have a little hut that they like to sleep in, don't keep it in the same spot all the time, move it around, because if you keep it in the same spot, it's likely something will happen there. Just something to think about. Hamsters, they tend to get a lot of teeth problems. Not exactly sure why, but my guess is that because they're always chewing on things, sometimes they eat things that are too sharp, and they can chip or get infections in their mouth because obviously they don't brush their teeth. So something like, a lot of them don't like having your finger in their mouth, preferably. I don't blame them. But things like diabetes also happen quite common in hamsters because their diet is highly processed. So unless you're giving them fresh vegetables and grains and things like that, it is quite likely that they will get diabetes. Their lifespan is pretty short, so it's not likely that they'll die because of diabetes, but it will impede their life quality, let's say. So going on to birds, we actually had two birds here. One was my mom's. She had a cockatiel, and that bird didn't like anybody but my mom, and she liked to fly around the house. But when I had my bird, she liked everybody. She just wanted to hop around and hang out with people. She loved everybody. And it was really sad. I remember the day the lady came to pick her up, and I just sat and cried because, first of all, I was moving to university in about a week, so I was pretty emotional at the time, but having to give up my bird was not a good start to that. They also have a lot of skin conditions because of the structure of their feathers. So a lot of the dirt gets dragged through the feathers to the skin, and then when they're preening, they can pull some of it out, but it's hard for them to reach everywhere. Beak and feather disease is pretty common because of that. They also get Giardia, which, if you don't know what that is, it's also common in dogs. It's a bacteria that gets into the intestines and causes things like diarrhea and vomiting. Typically, it shows up if the poop is really runny or has chunks of uncooked things in it, or blood or mucus. Those are all potential symptoms of Giardia. Paloma-virus is something that affects their feathers. The quality of the feathers starts to get really low. They're not big and fluffy anymore, and it can affect their ability to fly. Thrush, which is a mouth lesion. Again, they do sometimes pee or poop into their water, and if it's not clean, it's very easy for them to get some type of lesion or infection in their mouth. Goiter, turns out, is actually quite common in birds, which is if they're not getting enough iodine in their diet, the deficiency causes the swelling of the thyroid gland, which is in the throat. Well, it's down here. But it basically swells up into a giant lump and makes it really hard for them to swallow. And it can actually kill them, because if they can't get enough food and nobody notices and they can't get it fixed, then they can starve. So that's something to think about. Fish, a lot of it comes down to their water quality. If it's not cleaned regularly, if the pebbles on the ground aren't cleaned regularly, the fish will develop something like fin rot, which is when the fin literally starts deteriorating because of a bacteria. They can get ammonia poisoning from the water if it's not clean. They can get nitrate poisoning. They can get something called columnaris, which is a bacteria that's mold, and it basically slowly eats away at the skin, or in that case, the scales. and they're basically breathing in poison at that point. There's something called velvet in fishes, which I had never heard of before. It's a parasite, and it attaches to the scales, and it creates a velvet-like sheen over it, and it can actually suffocate the fish. I'm pretty sure that's what it said. And there's also something called ICH, which is a skin infection, and again can cause serious respiratory issues in the fish. But I haven't seen a lot of issues in fish caused by their diet because they really don't have a wide variety of things that they eat. So it's really just about the water quality for them. So do make sure to clean it regularly. If you notice anything odd about your fish, do be sure to do a little research, try and find out, or take them into a specialist. Lizard. Now, when I looked up things for lizard, there was a lot just general for reptiles, and there's a lot of viruses that are specific to certain types of reptiles, like a king cobra or a Komodo dragon or things like that. But these are the ones that are for house lizards and reptiles. There were a few for snakes too, but I didn't include those. I know some people that have snakes, so you're going to have to look that up. The first is called aretovirus, and it's essentially when the tissue becomes necrotic, meaning it starts to deteriorate, and they can get big gaping wounds. And if it gets to their organs, then they're not in a very good situation. Herpes is actually quite common in lizards. Not quite sure why. Pox is also pretty common, but again, that presents more as a skin condition and an immune deficiency. Reovirus and flavivirus are both similar types of immune-compromised conditions that happen. A lot of them have to do with temperature. So if you don't have the lizard's environment at the right temperature, or a variance in temperature within their environment so they can regulate their own temperature, then that can cause a lot of problems for their system. They are naturally able to regulate their own temperature, but they need different temperatures. So if they're hot, they go to the cold place. If they're cold, they go to the hot place. But typically their reptiles are cold-blooded, but they do like being warm, especially when they're not feeling well. They're more prone to go towards the heat if it's something like a virus, but again, it comes down to hygiene. So if their environment isn't cleaned and it's not just taking everything out, wiping the tank down and putting everything back in, each thing that goes in their environment has to be cleaned because a lot of the bacteria and parasites and things like that come from the environment. So if they're not, and this goes for birds and hamsters too, if their environment is not cleaned regularly and to a high enough standard, that is most likely when they get sick. Because most of them don't come into contact with other animals that would have these conditions. So it is your responsibility to look after them. But again, I remember when I was about 8, when we got our first goldfish, and we would alternate cleaning the tank. Like, I was little, I couldn't quite lift the thing, but my mom would lift it to the counter and pour it out, and then I would clean it, and then fill it back up with water, and she would lift it and put it back down. But even something like that teaches them routine and regularity and priorities too, because yes, homework is important and your extracurriculars are important, but if you made a commitment to this animal, and you're like, oh, I'm too busy today, I can't, then you're not really doing anybody any favors. So take it seriously if you do decide to do it. If you have any questions about it, feel free to send me a message. I love to talk about animals, regardless of whether they have scales or feathers or fur. So that's all I have to say about smaller pets. Have a really interesting video coming next week because there was a free docuseries about horses called Listening to the Horse, and the last episode comes out today. That's why I couldn't do it this week, but we're going to talk about that next week because it's all about horses and connection and learning the do's and don'ts and all of that stuff, and I find it really, really interesting because I don't have a huge horse background, so that's really exciting for me. So that's what's happening next week. My Reiki class, I ordered the manuals, but because you get free shipping if you order 5, I ordered 5, so I have a couple spots left. If you still want to sign up, if you were on the fence, you still have a chance to get in on that. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it a lot. And I get to meet one of my Reiki clients for the first time because she lives in Mississauga and she's coming up. And I'm very excited. So have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next Tuesday to talk about horses.